All right, I will say good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsors. Thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Cheshvan. Meir and Rachel Gold for dedicating all the shurim this month in memory of Yonah, Tzvi, Ben Yosef, Chaim, Elazar, HaKohen. Noam Leah Efron for dedicating the shurim and Rosh this month in celebration of the 98th birthday of Noam's grandfather Yosef Hershel ben Mordechai Halevi. Our week of learning sponsors, Mr. Morton Esterson and Malka and Samuel Esterson, in memory of Mrs. Miriam Goldfein, Miriam Bas Matitiyahu Zichrona Livracha. Our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Shoshi and Zevi Daniel, and Roberta and David Schwartz, as a mazel tov to Rifki and David Flum on the birth of a baby boy. Mazel tov to the Flums, and may they be Zoch Meir Hashem to be machnis their son labrisol she'avram avinu bizmano legadol Torah lechupa ulemaisim tovim. And also with that, let us begin. So today's daf is daf tes. We are picking up Emir Hashem on the bottom of Ches Amud Beis 8b, and we are picking up 4 lines up from the bottom. Tanya Idach, another brisa. So remember again, we've been speaking about the last topic we're talking about over here is Yovel. The idea being that the first of Tishrei is also the Rosh Hashana for Yovlos. So says the Gemara Tanya Idach, we have another brisa, Yovel Hi. The pasuk says it is Yovel. Yovel Hi. Not Talmud Lomer. So we'll say, what does it mean, Yovel Hi? What exactly does that mean? So the Gemara says, listen to this. Lefi sha'amar v'kidashtem eshnasa chamishim. The pasuk says, you shall sanctify the 50th year. Yachol kishim shemiskadeshes v'holechas mitchilasa kach miskadeshes v'holechas b'sofa. So I'll say, listen to this. Take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Yachol kach shemiskadeshes b'sofa achar Rosh Hashana v'timashech ad Yom Kippurim. So we'll say, listen to this. If you remember in yesterday's daf, we ended off with the fascinating dynamic of Yovel, which is, when does Yovel begin? When does Yovel begin? Rosh Hashana. But when do some of the effects of Yovel go into place? Yom Kippur. So in essence, the actual Yovel begins Rosh Hashana, but again, as we saw before, Shiluach Havadim doesn't occur, right? The slaves going free, or going home, I should say, doesn't occur until Yom Kippur. So you might have thought the same way that Yovel has like this, we'll call it two-pronged start on the front end, maybe it has the two-pronged end on the back end. And maybe Yovel doesn't actually end until when? Yom Kippur of the 51st year. Just like there's an element of Yovel that doesn't quote-unquote begin until Yom Kippur of year 50, maybe in some way it continues until Yom Kippur of year 51. Talmud Lomar, therefore the pasuk says, Talmud Lomar, Yovel hi, shnasa chamishim. I'm sorry, I skipped the line. So, and don't say, come on, that's ridiculous. Yovel is a year. Of course it ends at Tishrei. Shari mosifin mechol ala kodesh. Because I will say, there would be room to say this, because remember, again, in general, we have the concept of mosifin mechol ala kodesh, which is, we always add on from the weekday to consecrated time. So you might have thought that the same way that Yovel has this two-pronged start, one part on the 1st of Tishrei, the second part on the 10th of Tishrei, so too Yovel doesn't really end until Yom Kippur of the following year. Unless you think that's preposterous, we do have the concept of Mosif and Mechol ala Kodesh, that we add on from the weekday onto the sanctified, so we extend consecrated periods of time. Talmud Lomar, Yovel hi shnasa chamishim. Therefore the pasuk says it is Yovel, the 50th year. Shnasa chamishim ata mekadesh v'ata mekadesh shnas chamishim v'achos. You consecrate year 50, you do not consecrate year 51. Good. So we'll say the Gemara goes weiter. V'Rabbanan. So what did the Rabbanan do with this drasha? I will say, if you take a look at Rashi, Rashi says, V'Rabbanan, Telo yalfi mikidashtem shetis kadesh mitchilasa v'lo itztir chile me'ute sofa. So we'll say the Rabbanan, remember again, who have a different drasha. We saw on yesterday's daf. What do they do with this pasuk? Here we go. Shnas chamishim atamona via tamona shnas chamishim va'achos. What the Rabbanim do with this drasha is as follows. They say the 50th year only counts as the 50th year, and what? Doesn't count as year 51. Now, what does that mean? La fuke mid Rabbi Yehuda. Da Amar shnas chamishim ola lekan ulekan. Rabbi say there's a fascinating shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds the Maseches Nedarim that actually the Yovel year actually counts in two ways. The Yovel year counts as year 50 of the last cycle and as year 1 of the new cycle. Look at Rashi, Lafukim with Rabbi Yehuda, first short line in Rashi. Dar Maseches Nedarim, Shnas Chamishim Ola Lekan Ulekan, Shnas Hayovel V'Shana Rishona L'Shmita Haba. So what's the position of Rabbi Yehuda? That ultimately year 50 counts as the end of the previous cycle and year number 1 of the new Shemitah cycle. So the Rabbanon disagree with this, and therefore where do they learn out that Rabbi Yehuda is wrong? The Pasuk says, Yovel Hi. The Pasuk says it's Yovel Hi Shnasa Chamishim. The Yovel is only the 50th year and is not year 51, does not also count as year 1 of the next cycle, which is how we paskin halacha l'maisa. Kamash malon dilo. Kamash malon, the year 50 is just that. It's just year 50 and does not count as year 1 of the next cycle. Shabbos said, so here's what's interesting. So now we're going to jump back for just a moment because the Gemara made a drasha. And the drasha was quite fascinating. The drasha was, you might have thought that the same way that Yovel has this two-pronged start in the beginning, begins on Rosh, on Tishrei, but certain aspects of it are activated on Yom Kippur, that you might have thought that Yovel extends into Yom Kippur of the next year. Unless you think that's crazy, we do have the concept of Mosifin Mechol al HaKodesh, that we add on from the weekday onto consecrated things. Rabbi say this is right Tosefes Kodesh. We have this by everything. So the Gemara now says, Rabbi say this is actually an incredible sugya. Udmosifin mechal ala kodesh minalan. Rabbi say, from where do you know this concept that mosifin mechal al hakodesh? How do I know that we add on from the weekday? Right, we take away from the weekday and we add it onto the Kodesh. And I both say, this is going to take on a variety of different forms. This means that we'll start holy things earlier, and we will extend holy things later. When I say holy things, probably better stated, holy times. Right? So how do we know this? I both say this is a great sugya. This anya, because we learned. The Pasuk says, literally, with plowing and with reaping, you shall abstain, you shall rest. So I'll say, what I just want to point out over here is as follows. The actual context of this Pasuk is Shabbos. The Pasuk is, Sheshes Yomim Tavod, Ubeyom Hashi Tishbos, B'charish Ubakatzir Tishbos. Right, 6 days you shall work, on the 7th day you shall rest, B'charish Ubakatzir Tishbos. So what's interesting is, the Pasuk itself is a little bit repetitive, because the Torah says, 6 days you should work, seventh day you should rest, and you should rest from plowing and reaping. So we're going to see that the way that certain opinions darshan this pasuk is, whereas the first part is talking about Shabbos, the second part is talking about Shemitah. But you'll see that come out in just a moment. So the Gemara says, time to Sanya, Becharish V'Katzir Tishbos, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Einot Tzarech Lomar Charish V'Katzir Shal Shvius. Sharik Varne'amar, Rabbi Akiva understands that the second part of this pasuk is not talking about Shabbos, but rather talking about Shemitah. So Rabbi Akiva says, well, if that's the case, the pasuk is a bit repetitive. Why? Because the Torah doesn't have to tell me that I'm not allowed to plow and I'm not allowed to reap on Shemitah, because I already know that. Sharik Varne'amar, Sodcha lo Sizra, V'Karmecha lo Sizmar. The Torah already says that you're not permitted to go ahead and work your field. So why do you have to add in B'charish u'bakatzar tishbos? Rabbi say, get ready for this. And this is very halacha l'maisa. Elo charish shel erev shvius hanichnas l'shvius. Rather, Rabbi say, what it's coming to teach me is that there's certain plowing that you're not allowed to do prior to the Shemitah year. Erev Shemitah. Erev Shemitah, certain working of the earth that you're not allowed to do, of the land prior to Shemitah. Look at Rashi. It's almost right across from Rashi. Charish shel erev shvius, shelo yachrosh sadeh ilan erev shvius, charish sheyol l'shvius. So this happens to be an interesting sugya in Hilchos Shemitah. There are certain things already you're not allowed to do from Elul. Already from Elul, prior to Shemitah, because they're considered to be like preparing the land during the sabbatical, during the Shemitah year. So Rabbi Akiva understands this idea of Becharish Ubakatzer Tishbo. So just to give you the structure over here. The first part of the pasuk is talking about Shabbos. Rabbi Akiva understands the second part of the pasuk, Becharish Ubakatzer Tishbos, is talking about Shemitah. The problem is so much Shemitah, the pasuk itself is repetitive, because I don't need the Torah to tell me that I can't do plowing and I can't do reaping, because at the end of the day, the Torah already tells me that elsewhere, that I can't work the land. So what is Bacharish Ubakatzer Tishbos coming to teach me? It's coming to teach me there's certain forms of charisha, of plowing, of working the land, that I can't do when? Not on Shemitah, but when? Erev Shemitah. The Katzir shall shvias hayotzi lemotze shvias, and it's also coming to teach you. And it tells you I can't reap. What is that referring to? So both say, listen to look at Rashi. Katzir shall shvias kigon tvua shehevia shlish b'shvias atanoig ba minog shvias b'shminis. Both say, and when it says that you're not allowed to reap, that's referring to produce that grew during Shemitah, but in fact is not being harvested until after Shemitah. See, Rabbi says an interesting halacha, which is that produce that attained 1/3 growth during the Shemitah year has Shemitah sanctity, even if what? Even if it was harvested after the Shemitah year. Rabbi say this is why, you see this a lot with wines as well, right? This is why, again, you could have Shemitah wines for a number of years after Shemitah, right? Depending on when the grapes reached maturity. It's not just wine, it's a lot of other products as well. So Rabbi says, Rabbi Akiva understands, so watch what just happened here. According to Rabbi Akiva, Bacharish Ubakatzer Tishbos teaches me certain things, certain working of the land is Aser Erev Shemitah, and certain produce which attained a requisite level of maturity during the Shemitah year will be Aser after Shemitah. When we say Aser, we don't literally mean Aser. But what does Aser mean? It has Shemitah sanctity. So in other words, you could have produce that is harvested in year number 8, right, post Shemitah, which still has Shemitah sanctity. In other words, we'll say, what's the takeaway message of the pasuk? That the Kiddush of Shemitah could extend before Shemitah and after Shemitah. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel says, Shabbos says, just want to point out, remember, what's the Gemara's kasha? From where do we know the concept of Mosif and Mechal ala Kodesh? Which means, how do we know that we extend consecrated times, i.e. start them earlier, end them later? Or Rabbi Akiva will say, learn from Shemitah, the fact that the sanctity of Shemitah could be extended into year number 7 and year number 6. And year number 8, Erev Shemitah and post Shemitah, shows that Mosifin Mechal ala Kodesh. By the way, the Gemara says, there's another opinion. Rabbi Shmuel says, no, that's not what the pasuk teaches me. B'charish Ubakatzer Tishbos teaches me as follows. Ma charish rishus, av katzir rishus. Just as charish, plowing, is a rishus, a non-mitzvah act, so too katzira is a rishus. Yotza, what does this come to exclude? Yotza, Katsir ha'omer shu mitzvah. This comes to exclude ultimately the harvesting of the omer, which is a mitzvah. But say, take a look at Rashi. Yotze katsir ha'omer shu mitzvah. Shafilu matzah katzer mitzvah liktzar. Yesh lecha lilmod mikan shedoches haShabbos. So also Rabbi Shmuel says the pasuk is teaching something very different. Becharish Ubakatzer teaches me that there is an obligation to abstain from malacha on Shabbos, unless of course what? The malacha is a mitzvah. If the malacha is a mitzvah, it could be done on Shabbos. What's an example of plowing or harvesting that's a mitzvah on Shabbos? Ketziras ha'omer. If you have to go ahead and harvest the barley for the omer offering, Rabbi Shmuel says that could even be done on Shabbos. Well, it's an interesting halacha by the omer is that it has to come from barley that you harvest that day or that night. They harvest, right? That night. In other words, even if you had barley that was pre-cut, you can't use it. It has to actually be harvested. So what the Rabbi Shmuel is saying is, the pasuk is coming to teach me, it's only charish and katzir that is chol, right? That is not a mitzvah, that is a rishos. But if you have an act of katsira that is a mitzvah, like the harvesting of the barley, that can be done even on Shabbos. So therefore, Rabbi Akiva learns out the concept of Mosifin Mechal ala Kodesh from the phrase Bacharish Ubakatzer Tishbos, which teaches me that we extend Shemitah. We bring Shemitah in early, and Shemitah goes late. Good. Rabbi Shmuel Mosifin Mechal ala Kodesh Minalan. Where does Rabbi Shmuel know this concept of Mosifin Mechal ala Kodesh? That Rabbi say we extend consecrated times to start them earlier and to end them later. Here we go. Nafkalei midisanya. Rabbi say learns that from the following drasha. V'inisim es nafsho seichem b'tisha. Rabbi say by Yom Kippur. The pasuk says you shall afflict your nefesh on the 9th. Now Rabbi say what's the problem with the pasuk? What's the problem with the pasuk? Affliction b'pashtos means what? Fasting. Yom Kippur is the 10th. Right, so what's going on over here? Yachal b'tisha. You might have thought that the Torah is telling me you also have to fast on the 9th. Talmud lomar ba'erev. Therefore the pasuk says at night. No, not on the 9th, but rather again you fast at night, the 10th. I ba'erev. Yachal mishatechshach. So since it says ba'erev, you might have thought that Yom Kippur does not begin until it gets dark, until Tzeis. Talmud lomar b'tisha. Therefore, the pasuk says you should fast on the 9th of Tishrei. So I will say, how does this shtim? How does this all come together? Here we go. HaKetzad maschil umis'ana mi ba'od yom. We'll say the halacha by Yom Kippur is we bring in the fast while it is still day, while it's still daytime. And what do we learn from here? Melamed shemosifin mechal ala kodesh. From here we learn that we add on from the chol onto the kodesh. Onto the Kodesh. So Rabbi say this is Rabbi Yishmael's makar, and this generally is the accepted makar for the concept of Mosifin Mechal ala Kodesh. That whenever we have a consecrated time, we extend, we bring it in early, and we extend it past the normal calendrical end date. Right, Yom Kippur, we bring in Yom Kippur early. See, I will say everyone knows about bringing Yom Kippur early, but interestingly enough, there's a concept of Tosefes Yom Kippur as well. Extend the Yom Kippur, you know, say the Bach brings down. He says, why don't we fast 2 days of Yom Kippur, Sveika de Yoma, just like we keep every other Yom Tiv 2 days, right? It's what we're doing, guys, isn't it? It's a strange thing, no? Yom Kippur, which is the most important day of the entire year, it's the one day we don't do Sveika de Yoma. So the Bach says, it's Exerish and Tzvi Yachal, but you can't do it. You can't do it. You can't make it. Although the Bach does say there were Yechidei Skula throughout the ages who did keep 2 days of Yom Kippur. Fasted two straight days just to keep the sake of the Yoma. Interesting. In any event, the point where it says the Gemara, there's a concept by Yom Kippur of ultimately bringing it in early and extending it. The truth is, we end up bringing it in early. We all do, because the truth is, we're beginning Yom Kippur no later than Hadlakas Neiros, than candle lighting, and Kol Nidre is generally earlier as well. So you're bringing it fast early. We're generally extending it also. Why? Because the truth is, you have Ma'ariv, right? You have Ma'ariv afterwards. So by definition, we don't have Ma'ariv until the fast is over. By the time you get home, Kiddush Levana, already it's much later. And anyway, so therefore, Rabbi Yishmael, this becomes the makar for Mosif and Mechal HaKodesh. I just want to point out something very interesting. Everyone is agreeing to the principle of Mosif and Mechal HaKodesh. The machlokes is the makar. Rabbi Akiva, Shemitah, Rabbi Yishmael, Yom Kippur. There's so much to say just on where each of them are bringing in this makar, because it's fascinating. 2 dramatically different days that are, or 2 dramatically different times. Shemitah is not a day, but 2 dramatically different, we'll call it constructs, from which you learn Mosif and Mechal HaKodesh. If we have a little bit of time, we'll go back to it. So the Gemara says, Einli ela bichnisaso b'tziyasu minayim. So the truth is, remember, the drasha of Batisha and Ba'erev only teaches me that I bring in Yom Kippur early. How do I know that I extend it? Talmud lomar me'erev ad erev. The pasuk says from evening until evening. So just like the initial evening of Yom Kippur, I extend by bringing it in early. So too again, the Matzeh Yom Kippur evening, I extend by ending Yom Kippur a little bit later. Einli el Yom Kippurim. I only know Yom Kippur. Shabbosos minayin. How do you know about it? There's a general concept of Tosefes Shabbos, of bringing in Shabbos early and ending Shabbos later. Talmud lomar tishbesu. The pasuk says tishbesu, right? So again, the extra tishbesu teaches me Shabbos, any day that is a Shabbos, right? Any day that is, right? So Shabbos, well, tishbesu means Shabbos. So therefore it teaches me that Allah Chalamai says the concept of Tosefes on Shabbos as well. Yomim tovim minayin. How do I know about Yom Tov? And Abba say, by the way, I just want to point out, this tishbesu is so important, and it's so good that we're learning this now. Because we're all saying, this is how we have to be careful, about becoming a Shomer Erev Shabbos as well. And what it means to be Mosif on Shabbos. I'll say, especially, we're going to switch the clocks in just a little bit. A person has to be Roa es Hanolod. You can't be running into the 18 minutes. The 18 minutes are there. It's break in case of emergency. But if you're utilizing it every single week, there's something wrong with the way you're structuring your Erev Shabbos. Tosefah Shabbos is not a nice thing. Tosefah Shabbos is a mitzvah. You see clearly Chazal are saying it, and how careful we have to be. Okay, you don't have to be a chatzos lady, but Lamaisa, at least to go ahead and be ready at the time of Hadlakas Neros, be ready, because remember, you have a built-in Tosefah Shabbos with the 18 minutes right there to be able to be Makabel Shabbos at the time I'm supposed to. It's not just good for my Shabbos in general, but it's a mitzvah of Tosefah Shabbos. Yomim Tovim, I don't know about Yom Tif, Talmud Lomar, Shabbos Chem. So ultimately, again, the pasuk says your Shabbos. So there's all these extra words. Tishbesu is Shabbos. Shabbos Chem is Yom Tiv. HaKetzad kol makom sheyesh bo shvus mosifin mechal ala kodesh. Shabbos, at the end of the day, Rabbi Shalom's drasha is any time you find Shabbos, in other words, any time that there is a mitzvah to abstain from malacha, there is a mitzvah of Tosefas. That's the idea. Any time that Allah Lamaisa there is a Shavuos, there is a mitzvah of Tosefas. But Rabbi Akiva, Shavuos says, so now we've got, this is really very exciting. And we'll say it's Kedai, this is the kind of sugya you want to chazer over because it's so you saw the stake. Everyone's agreeing on the principle. Mosif Mechal HaKodesh. Where do you learn it out from? Rabbi Akiva, Shemitah, Rabbi Yishmael. Yom Kippur. Interestingly enough, the drasha of Rabbi Shalom Yom Kippur is a much more comprehensive drasha because remember it includes Yom Kippur, but also as we see includes Shabbos and Yom Tiv as well. Rabbi Akiva, what does Rabbi Akiva do with this drasha? Right, so Rabbi Akiva who darshan Shemitah, what does he do ultimately with the drasha of Yom Kippur? My avidlei mi boile lichiditani chia barav midifti. The tani chia barav midifti. Here we go. V'inisim es nafsho seichem betisha. The pasuk says, "You shall afflict your nefesh on the 9th of Tishrei." And same kasha. V'chi betisha misanin. Do we fast on the 9th? V'halo basiri misanin. We only fast on the 10th. So we'll say, what does Rabbi Akiva do with this? Here we go. Or I should say, chia barav midifti. Elomer lacha. Kala ochal v'shoseh betishi. If you eat and drink on the 9th, ma'ala alav hakasuv, the Torah counts it as if what? Ki'ilu his'aneh tishi'i va'asiri. Kadosh Baruch Hu counts it as if what? You fasted on the 9th and the 10th. That's Rabbi Akiva's drasha. So I will say, interestingly enough, this in general is a fascinating drasha about why it is that if you eat on the 9th, ultimately it's as if you fast on the 9th and the 10th, which the Gemara is essentially saying that there is a mitzvah to eat on the 9th. And the mitzvah to eat on the 9th is not simply a utilitarian mitzvah to get you prepared for the tainus, to get you prepared for the fast, but there is inherent in the 9th a mitzvah to go ahead and eat. We'll say on the most basic level, why is there a mitzvah to eat on the 9th? What's the pshat? Right? Why is there a mitzvah to eat? Because we'll say Yom Kippur is this great anomaly. Because Yom Kippur is a Yom Tiv. It's a Yom Tiv. We say Shechianu. The problem, of course, becomes where this Yom Tiv identity is. It's missing the one thing that usually makes a Yom Tiv for us, which is food. Right? So therefore, again, you see this drush, you see this emphasis on eating and feasting and physically enjoying the 9th to put ourselves in the right mindset. In other words, it's not just eating because you have to eat before a fast to be ready for the fast. It's eating and enjoying and mamish an atmosphere of simcha. And that's the pshat. See, I always wondered, what does it mean if you eat on the 9th? It's as if you fasted on the 9th and the 10th. What does that mean? What does that mean? Elamai, what is it saying? If you eat on the 9th, and the reason you're eating is why? Because you feel the simcha of Yom Kippur. Because you feel the simcha of slicha u'mechila. Because you know you're getting a clean slate. You know HaKadosh Baruch Hu is forgiving you. You know you're going to get another chance. You know you're going to get the brachos you're asking for. You know you're going to get another year. Zachrenu l'chayim melech ha'peis b'chayim. If you know that and you believe that and you've made a plan to make this the year, that's a simcha. That's a simcha. If you have that mindset on the 9th and you're eating and you're feasting on the 9th with that ashkafa, then ultimately it's as if you fast on the 9th and the 10th. Because they're both saying the entire essence of Yom Kippur is a simcha. Ein yomim tovim liyisrael. The Mishnah Taina says, like Yom Kippur. But sometimes on the day itself, it's a little bit difficult to feel that simcha because you're fasting. But when can you feel the true simcha? On the 9th, if you're feasting. So those who feast on the 9th with the proper hashkaf of the simcha of the day, HaKadosh Baruch Hu counts it as if you went ahead and you fasted on the 9th and the 10th. We'll have to chazer over this before Yom Kippur in Mirat Hashem, because it's such a profound yisod. It's such a profound yisod in terms of what it means to eat on the 9th and how we're supposed to enter into Yom Kippur. But I just mentioned before, because that concludes that sugya. Everyone's agreeing. It struck me the lashon of Mosifin Mechal ala Kodesh. It's just a fascinating lashon, because the truth is, if I were writing it, I wouldn't write it like that. How would you write it? Mosifin Mikodesh ala Chol. Right? That seems to be Mosifin Mechal ala Kodesh means we add on from the weekday onto the Kodesh. I don't know. You would think, and it appears other ways also in Shas. You would think it's Mosifin Mikodesh ala Chol. We want to add on from the Kodesh onto the Chol. And perhaps Chazal are teaching us something incredibly important. You see, if the Lashon would have been Mosifin me Kodesh ala Chol, you take the Kodesh and onto the Chol, you might have thought, what's the goal in life? The goal in life is to get rid of Chol. Right? The goal in life is to minimize Chol as much as possible and go ahead and there are things that are Kodesh, there are things that are Chol. Extend the Kodesh as much as possible to go ahead and remove the Chol. But that's not actually our mission in life. Our mission in life is Mosifin Mechol ala Kodesh. The goal in life is to take that which is Chol, or that which looks Chol, that which looks mundane, that which looks ordinary, and infuse Kedusha into it. You see, there's nothing in this world that can't be made Kadosh. There's nothing in this world that can't be uplifted. Some things are more obvious, some things are more apparent, and some things require a bit more of an understanding. But the yisod in life is not Mosifin Mekodesh ala Chol. There's Kedusha, this Chol. The goal is minimize your Chol, maximize your Kodesh. No, that's not the avodah of the Jew. The avodah of the Jew is Mosifin Mechol ala Kodesh. Look at the things in life that appear mundane. Look at the things in life that are mundane and figure out how to infuse Kedusha, how to add Kedusha to them. That is the ultimate mandate and mission of the Jew. What the Ramban calls Kiddush HaChomer, sanctification of the mundane, sanctification of the material. And that's perhaps why Chazal Dafka used this lashon, which seems a bit more convoluted. Mosifin Mechal ala Kodesh is not just a halacha, but a mandate in life to take that which is Chol and to find a way to make it Kaddish. So we'll say the Gemara goes right there. Tan Rabbanan, we'll say fascinating sugya. Tan Rabbanan, Yovel hi, Afa Pi Shel Shamta. So we'll say now it's going to get into interesting sugya. Yovel now we've begun to see has a number of different components to it. Right? There's first of all, Yovel is a regular Shemitah year. Right? It has a Shemitah component to it, so you can't work the land. Right? Number 2, there's Shiluach Avadim, emancipation of slaves. And number 2, there's returning of land to its original owners. What we're now going to discuss, interestingly enough, is are all of these pieces necessary in order for the Yovel identity to be activated? So watch this. Tan Rabbanan, Yovel hi. It's Yovel. It's Yovel. What does it teach me? Afa pi shelo shamtu. Even if you did not go ahead and observe the Shemitah aspect, Afa pi shelo taku, even if he didn't sound the shofar, Yachol afa pi shelo sholchu, you might have thought, even if you did not emancipate the slaves, TALMUD lomar hi. Therefore, the pasuk says Yovel hi. So we'll say the Gemara's understanding Yovel hi means you could be missing certain parts of the Yovel, and it's still Yovel, but there are certain things which are an absolute necessity in order to activate the Yovel identity. And if you don't do these things, then the Yovel identity of the year is not activated. So Rabbi Yehuda says, Shiluach Avadim. If you don't emancipate slaves on Yovel, the Yovel identity of the year is not activated. Look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, Rashi says, Tamar lomar hi, imasisa dvarim halalu hi Yovel, ve'im lav ino Yovel. So we'll say, this Rabbi Yehuda is saying something absolutely incredible. Rabbi Yehuda is saying that halacha l'maisa, if you did not do the things of Yovel, in other words, you didn't observe the Shemitah, you didn't go out and blow the shofar, you didn't return lands, right? It's still Yovel. But if no one emancipated their slaves, it's not Yovel. It's not Yovel. Yovel, he means Yovel needs this piece in order to be activated. Rabbi Yossi, that's Rabbi Yehuda's position. Rashi, if you go back to the previous Rashi says over in the middle of that Rashi, Afilu lo nasu bo dvarim halalu havara shofar lo shevel achuza then shmitas karko shekanu zemi zed chsiv basar ikra afa pikin shem yovo alav lios aser bizriya ubetzira uketzira kedichsiv lo sizro. So we'll say shitas Rabbi Yehuda is, even if you did not blow the shofar, even if you did not return land, it's still yovel as long as you emancipated slaves. But I will say, understand Rabbi Yehuda is saying. Rabbi Yehuda is saying, if for argument's sake, no one emancipated their slaves on Yovel, the Yovel identity of the year is not activated. Rabbi Yossi says, Yovel hi, afa pi shelo shamtu, afa pi shelo sholchu, yochel afa pi shelo taku, Talmud lo marhi. Rabbi Yossi says, because I will say, what the dashing over here is the phrase is Yovel hi, it is Yovel. They're understanding that he means that in order for Yovel to occur, something has to happen. The machlokes is, what is that something? I don't need everything, but I need something. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the something is shiluach havadim. According to Rabbi Yossi, what's the he? Shofar. Shofar. If you didn't blow the shofar to usher in the Yovel year, it's not Yovel. It's not Yovel. So we'll say machlokes Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi. So the Gemara says, "Achar shem mikra echad marba v'mikra echad mamit." So we'll say, now here's what I know. Once I know that at the end of the day, right, I have a particular pasuk that ultimately is marba and a particular pasuk that's mamit, which means what? The psukim are telling me all of the things that happen during the Yovel year, right? So what are all the things that happen during the Yovel year? Number one, shofar. Number two, we're going to call it Shemitah. But Shemitah refers to the fact that the land lay fallow, but it also refers to the fact that land reverts back to its original owner. And number three, Shiluach Havadim, returning, right, emancipation of slaves. Those are the three things that happen during the Yovel year. So at the end of the day, the Torah is marba all three of those things. Then it says Yovel Hi. And Yovel Hi teaches me that I don't need all three of those things to activate the Yovel identity. Rather, even if what? I have one of those things, the Yovel year is activated. So v'chimi achar shem mikra echad marbe u'mikra echad man'it mipnei ma ani omer Yovel hi afa pi shelo shalchu ve'ein Yovel ela imkein taku. So we'll say, so now they're asking Rabbi Yossi, why tkiyah shofar? Why shofar, right? Rabbi Yossi says, even if he didn't emancipate the slaves, and even if he didn't return ancestral land, as long as he blew the shofar, Yovel, that's all you need to identify or to activate the Yovel year. Why shofar? Why shofar? So look what Rabbi Yossi says. This is so profound. He says, Lefi she'efshar li olam below shiluach havadim, because literally it's possible for the world to exist without emancipation of slaves. The efshar li olam below tkiyah shofar. But the world cannot exist without tkiyah shofar. Now what does that mean? On a very simple level, right across in Rashi. She'efshar li olam below shiluach havadim. Pamim she'ein evet ivri b'yisrael she'it on shiluach. I will say, is it possible to have a time where there's not one Jewish slave? Is that possible? Sure. Possible. So in other words, you could set up a metzias where there is no shiluach havadim in the world. On the flip side, Rashi says, "V'i afshar shelo yehei shofar matzei ba'olam." In other words, there may not be a Jewish slave, but there'll always be what? There'll always be a shofar. Levichach yesh lanu lomar ki shetala akasav lo tala ela b'davar hamatzei le'olam. So Rabbi Yossi says, Yovel, he comes to teach me that there's an aspect of Yovel that will always be in existence. And the aspect of Yovel that will always be in existence is the aspect of Yovel which is ma'akev, which is an indispensable necessity. So when you look at everything, what's the one aspect of Yovel that is an indispensable, that will always be a reality? Well, look, think about it for just a moment. Do you always have to? Is there always shiluach havadim? Are slaves always emancipated? No. If there's what? No Jewish slaves. What about return of ancestral land? If everybody already owns the original land, there's no. So see the other aspects of Yovel. It's not probable, but it's possible to have a Yovel where these other pieces are not necessary. So what's the one piece that always exists? Shofar. In other words, you can't say it's not going to be a shofar. In other words, it's always going to be a shofar. Always going to be a shofar. Impossible, right? Always going to be a shofar in the world. Therefore, Rabbi Yossi says the part of Yovel that is a fixed reality, that's the part of Yovel that is ma'akev, the blowing of the shofar. I will say, by the way, if you just take a look at that, if you take a look at that phrase, it's such a profound phrase, right? Efshar li olam bilo shiluach avodim. I will say, what does that mean? It's possible in the world, on a deeper level, right? It's possible in the world, ultimately, to always remain a slave. Below shiluach avodim. I will say, we're all slaves to something. And the truth is, I'd venture to say, most people remain in servitude for their entire life. There's that thing I'm enslaved to, or things I'm enslaved to, and even though I can emancipate myself, more often than not, I don't. Afshar li olam below shiluach avodim. It's possible for a person to always remain enslaved and never leave. But what can't you live without? But afshar li olam below tikiyah shofar. Shavos on a deeper level, what does tikiyah shofar represent? We know by them, what does tikiyah shofar represent? It's malchus. It's Kabbalah's Ol Malchus Shamayim, right? You talk about Shofar Gadol, it's the acceptance of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as my Melech. You could go through life highly flawed and imperfect. You could go through life as an Eved. It's possible. It's possible. You could even live kind of productively, even though I'm enslaved to something. What can't I go through life without? I can't go through life without Tikiyah Shofar. I need Malchus. I need Kabbalah's Ol Malchus Shamayim. I could go through life as an Eved, but I can't go through life without the Ribono Shel Olam, without Tikiyah Shofar. Such an incredible yisod. Davar Acher, another possibility, says Rabbi Yossi, Zu Masur Lebezdin, V'Zu Eino Masur Lebezdin. There's another reason why Tikiyah Shofar is the most important thing for Yovel, and not Shiluach Havodim, for one simple thing. Rabbi say, who is Shiluach Havodim dependent on? Who is it dependent on? People. Right? If I have an Eved Ivri, it's up to me to emancipate my slave. Who's in charge of Tikiyah Shofar? Beis Din. So Rabbi Yossi will say it makes more sense for the Yovel identity to be activated by something controlled by Beis Din and not by something controlled by individuals. You don't have control of what individual people do. So the Gemara says, "My davar acher, v'chi tema ifshar deleka chad besofa olam delo mishaleach." Because maybe you won't like Rabbi Yossi's first agreement. He'll say, no. There's always going to be an Eved Ivri. There's always going to be an Eved Ivri. Zu Misur Lebezdin, V'zu Eino Misur Lebezdin. We still like to Tikiyah Shofar better, Rabbi Yossi says, because at the end of the day, it makes sense. The Yovel identity is unlocked by something controlled by Beis Din and not something controlled by individuals. So therefore, we'll say, this is the position of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi holds that halacha l'maisa, Yovel, he teaches me, all you need to activate the Yovel year, the identity of the Yovel year, is Tikiyah Shofar. Why? Two-pronged argument, because shofar is the only thing that always exists, and number two, shofar is in the control, in the domain of Beis Din. Next, Bishlam Rabbi Yossi Kedagar Taime, Rabbi Huda my Taima. So what about Rabbi Huda? Rabbi says Rabbi Huda's position is what? Rabbi Huda's position is Shiluach Havadim, that the identity of Yovel is activated by emancipation of slaves. And if you don't emancipate slaves, it's not Yovel. Which Rabbi says is a pretty wild idea, right? That the identity of the year is dependent on our actions. And if we make a pact, all of us make an Avera pact, none of us are releasing our Avodim Ivrim, it's not Yovel. It's not Yovel. So where does he get this from? So my time, Amikra, Ukrasem Dror Ba'aretz. The pasuk says, you shall proclaim Dror, which again we'll assume right now means freedom in the land. The Kasavar, and he says, Mikra Nidrash Lefanov, Velo Lifnei Fanav. And he holds, right, Rabbi Yehuda holds, that both say whenever you have a pasuk can be darshaned to include that which immediately precedes it, but not a topic which appears two psukim earlier. Look at Rashi just a moment. Mikra Nidrash Lefanov, Miuta Dehi Akrias Durar Kroi, the Salik Mine, Velo Atikiyah Shofar Aksul Levanos. We'll say, so just to understand the flow of things. The Torah first speaks about Tikiyah Shofar, then speaks about emancipation of slaves, and then says Yovel Hi. Rabbi Yehuda's model is as follows. Yovel Hi is a modifier on that which immediately preceded it. What immediately precedes the phrase Yovel Hi? And I must remember again, the phrase Yovel Hi tells me this is what you need in order for Yovel to be Yovel. So what immediately precedes that phrase Yovel? What immediately precedes it? Ukrasem Drar Ba'aretz, emancipation. And Rabbi Yehuda's exegetical model is that you could darshan that which immediately precedes Yovel Hi, but not something that is two psukim earlier. So you have Tikiyah Shofar, emancipation, Yovel Hi. Yovel, he goes back and modifies that which immediately came before it, which is emancipation of slaves. Mikra Nidrash Lefanav Lo Lefanav. D'chuli Alma Dror Lashon Cheres My Mashma. So we'll say, just by the way, how do you know that Dror means freedom? Ukrasim Drar Ba'aretz, the Gemara said, means you emancipate slaves. How do you know that that's what it means? The Sanya Ein Durar El Lashon Cheres. Durar means freedom. Rabbi Yehuda, Ma Lashon Durar. Listen, this is very interesting. Kimidayer Be Daira, like someone who goes ahead and lives. Be Daira, Rashi says, Mishu Birshuso, Lagar B'chomalon Sheyirtze. So both say, you live wherever you want. You live wherever you want, and ultimately, Umovil Schor B'chomadina, and you can take your merchandise and sell it wherever you want. So I'll say, this is very interesting, right? The definition of freedom is the ability to live wherever you want and work wherever you want. So I will say, why isn't the definition of freedom accomplished just by saying you can live wherever you want? Isn't that the greatest manifestation of freedom? Because I will say, living wherever you want without being productive is not freedom, right? Freedom is the ability to be productive, right? To sit around and do what I want. That's very nice. That's the absence of servitude. Freedom means the ability, to live wherever you want and to do business. Do business, of course, means to be productive, right? So if you can be productive, so ultimately, again, you can live wherever you want, do business wherever you want. That's the definition of freedom. So we'll say, here we go. So therefore, we'll say, now we have two shitas. What do you need? Yovel he. What's an indispensable component of Yovel? Rabbi Yehuda, Shiluach Havadim, Ukrasim Dra Ba'aretz, Mikra Nidrash Lefanav, Yovel he, Krasim Dra Ba'aretz, Rabbi Yossi, Tkiyah Shofar, because it's in the hands of Beis Din, and that'll always be in existence. Another shita. Here we go. Aval Chacham Omrim Shloshtan Ma'akvos. Wow. Chachamim say in order for Yovel to be Yovel, you need all three components. Shmita, Shiluach Havadim, Shofar. Kasavri, because the Rabbanon hold, Mikra Nidrash Lefanov, V'lifnei Fanav, Ula'acharav. This is great. They hold, Yovel he goes on that which comes before it, that which comes two psukim before it. So remember again, before it is Krasim Dror Shiluach Havadim. Two things before it is Shofar, and after it is Shemitah, returning of ancestral lands. Vaksiv Yovel. But it says Yovel. What do you do with that extra phrase? Hahu da'afila b'chutz la'aretz. Rabbi says this is pretty wild. That tells you that Yovel applies in chutz la'aretz as well. Really? Vaksiv ba'aretz. But the pasuk says ba'aretz hahu bizman shenoig drar ba'aretz noig b'chutz la'aretz. Bizman she'eno noig ba'aretz. So also it comes to teaching as follows, that Allah l'maisa, when Yovel applies in Eretz Yisrael, it applies in Chutz La'aretz as well. But when Yovel does not apply in Eretz Yisrael, it does not apply in Chutz La'aretz. So I will say, by the way, which component of Yovel applies in Chutz La'aretz is only Shiluach Havadim. That if you own an Eved Ivri in Chutz La'aretz, when there is halachic Yovel in Eretz Yisrael, you will free your Eved Ivri in Chutz La'aretz as well. But again, that assumes that Yovel is in effect in Eretz Yisrael. So we'll say, so that is our three-way machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, and the Chachamim. Yovel he, what is necessary in order to activate the Yovel component of the day? Rabbi Yehuda, Shiluach Havadim, Rabbi Yossi, Tkiyah Shofar, Chachamim, all three. But so I'll stop over here for today. Tomorrow I'll start with the Rambam about how we paskin, and then Amir Tashem will continue in the journey in the Gemara. Shkach Rabosai.